It's both human services and education. There were cuts to this was before the McCleary ruling. There were cuts to K through 12 education that were not part of the protected areas, and then higher education, but mostly it's been human services. And we're seeing the result of that, court cases related to mental health, because once you start cutting too deep, we have other legal obligations and court cases arise, yes.
Another one of the major cuts has been in the housing trust fund.
Yeah.
Before 2008, we were targeting 200 million, and usually comes out with 75 million. So the housing trust fund, and that has affected the inventory of affordable housing, which has increased the unemployment, the homeless. So
yes, and one thing to note is that what we're talking about here is the operating budget. So the capital budget is a separate budget, but you're absolutely right.
That's another place where it's cut.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you explain to me the operating capital?
Yeah.
No.
What's the difference? So the operating budget is, let's start with the capital budget is building projects. So building housing, building schools, and we fund that through bonds that we take out. The operating budget is funded primarily through our business and operating taxes, through our sales tax, property tax, and that goes to invest in more of the kind of day-to-day costs of the state. So I want to talk a little bit just about what the governor did, because I think this is, it provides a roadmap. How do we resolve this fiscal challenge that we're in? And we would characterize the governor's proposal as a really strong framework going forward for the budget. And a big reason for that is because, as you can see, almost 60% of the solution is from new revenue. And that's really important because in years past, most of the budget solution has come from cuts. So in this case, the governor is not proposing that cuts are the answer to resolving the shortfall, and instead is putting new revenue on the table. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those things are in a second. The other thing it is important to note that the governor chooses not to do is to fund Initiative 1351. So that takes a big part of the problem statement off the table. And it's easier for the governor to do that than it is for the legislature, because, as I said, the legislature will need to get a 2/3 vote if they choose to do that. Most of the governor's investments are in education, primarily in K-12 education. The governor proposes to fully fund all of our McCleary investments ahead of schedule. So it comes due in the 2017-19 biennium, and the governor says we're gonna do this ahead of schedule. So that was a significant investment, and then there were some additional investments in early learning and higher education. So how does the governor do that? Here are the four mechanisms for raising revenue in the governor's proposal. One is through a carbon pollution pricing plan. Conceptually, what this is limiting the amount of carbon pollution that businesses are allowed to emit, and then allowing those corporations to purchase allowances for the within the limit of the carbon pollution. So those purchases, funding from that would go to the state. This would raise about $1 billion a year. Most of the money is going to go to the transportation and the capital budgets, but about $400 million will go to the operating budget. Secondly, the governor proposes increasing the cigarette tax by 50 cents per pack and extending the tobacco tax to e-cigarettes and vapor products, and that together would raise $56 million. Third, the governor proposes closing 5 tax breaks, which would raise about $300 million. And then the final one I'll talk a little bit more about, which is the capital gains tax. We were particularly thrilled to see this in the governor's budget because this is something that we've been working on for a few years at the Budget and Policy Center, and we think that this is a really important proposal that addresses 2 of the major flaws with our revenue system. One, that it's inadequate, we don't raise enough money. This would raise significant money. And secondly, our tax system is inequitable. We have the most regressive tax system in the nation, which means that people with lower incomes pay more as a share of their income in taxes than the wealthiest people in our state. So it's completely upside down. So for those of you who may be thinking that you're not quite personally familiar with what capital gains tax is, you're probably like most people because capital gains go almost primarily to millionaires. 73% of capital gains go to people who earn $1 million or more. And capital gains are essentially the profit that you make when you sell a stock, a bond, or other high-end financial asset. Sometimes when talking about this, the first thing that pops into people's mind is what about my retirement or my college savings or my home? Those things are exempt. So these really is about the very high-end financial assets. And the governor's proposal would exempt the first $50,000 in gains. So people would only be taxed on the profit above that amount. So once you do that, you're really limiting this tax to the wealthiest 1% in our state. And even for those people who would pay this, the increase in their taxes is minimal. So for the wealthiest people in our state, this would increase their taxes as a share of their income by 1.4%. Let me put that in perspective a little bit. So if you're one of the lower income Washingtonians and you earn $20,000 or less in the state, you pay 17% of your income in taxes. 17%. If you're one of the wealthiest Washingtonians, you pay 2.4% of your income in taxes. This would bump that up to a little over 3%. It still does not correct the upside down nature of our tax system, but it certainly does something towards making the system more equitable and would raise about $800 million a year, which is a significant boost to the state, and again would touch very, very few people in the state and only those who could most afford it. Yes?
I got a question for you. I'm working on my income tax right now, and I noticed that I have some capital gains from some investments. I'm kind of a middle income kind of guy, so is that going to hit me? Should I vote against it?
If your gains are over $50,000,
Say again.
if your gains are over $50,000,
not anywhere near that.
535,000 or more.
What's the strategy for these 4 revenue streams to go ahead with? Who do we start on first? Are people talking about this? Is there a way? I mean, mutual fund holders, like you're saying, people need to work this out. On paper, maybe if some of us are millionaires, we don't even know it, and it's really just paper that we're defining it. Okay, maybe it goes up 2 or 3%. Can we get people on board to say, yeah, this is fair, this is equitable, and of course the rich are going to have to pay a little more. The percentages are going to be less. Are we going to start with the finance, or are we going to start with something else in terms of the revenue streams to get more income?
So I'm sorry, what's the?
Well, of those actual revenue increases, where they're coming from, is there a strategy out of the governor's office or out of people's, like the Democratic Party in the House?
Yeah, I think there are definitely leaders in both chambers, primarily the House, I would say, on each of these proposals, and the ones that I'm most into with are the capital gains proposals. So Representative Lori Jenkins is the sponsor of that proposal. She has sponsored this in the past too.
Yes.
Representative Lori Jenkins.
Okay, good.
And then Representative Joe Fitzgibbon is the sponsor of the carbon pollution pricing proposal. And then Ruben Carlisle is been a champion on many of these things, and I'm not sure what he's thinking around tax break closures and other things, but he's definitely a champion on the overall transparency and fairness of the tax system. So there's some great folks that are taking the charge on this, and so reinforcing their efforts is really great, and also talking to key decision makers like the budget writers, so Ross Hunter in the House, and Andy Hill in the Senate, and then all of the folks on those committees, because they're the budget committees, and then in the House there is a finance committee, and that's Ruben Carlisle's committee. So those are great places to start.
You mentioned 1 cent Are there any other senators that are?
There are some senators who feel strongly about these things. They have not put forth a proposal yet. So I would recommend talking with Senator Sharon Nelson, Senator Croft, Senator Ranker. They're good champions on issues like this. I'm not sure what their strategy is. It's a tough battle in the Senate, but those would be good people to connect with. Yeah.
Has there been a projection for how much revenue will be raised by a state income tax?
There hasn't been a proposal on the table as of late, so we don't
It
have
seems like this would be a primary year report.
Yeah, but it's already.
Since 60% of us voted for the education bill, but there was no funding for it. So it seems like with the state income tax, two ways. You'd probably be getting a lot of money out of the highest people if they couldn't hide their money. And you could, along with that, like Arizona, you can have state tax credits where I can say I owe $5,000 in state tax income. I can say, okay, I want this to go to education because I voted for that, or I want to go to affordable housing. That's what I'm interested in.
I totally agree with you, and I think there has not been an appetite to go that direction.
It seems like there might be this time because so many of us voted for better education. We're kind of saying, yes, I want that. We're probably saying, I'd be willing to support that with money.
I think we've kind of tried that so many times because it involves amending the Constitution. But I wanted to ask, what's our timeline? Because budget has, if I remember right, is kind of a special timeline.
For when the budget will be developed.
Well, when does does it have to originate in the House, like nationally, or is it in both, and then when they switch, and so what are the timelines?
So there is nothing written in law about who writes a budget first, but they tend to trade year to year. So technically this year it's the House's turn to write a budget first. So I would expect that to be the case unless they decide to do something otherwise. But we should probably see a proposal late March, maybe early April. And then usually, once one chamber comes out with a budget, you usually see the other chamber follow pretty soon after. And then from there, it's all about negotiating between those two proposals. Yeah.
Is the capital gains tax just as simple as writing the law for it, or is there any other constitutional or other kind
No,
of thing?
it's just statute change. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm just gonna make an observation that of all of them, the cigarette tax is aggressive because a higher percentage of the homeless smoke than the middle class and upper class. So of the two, by increasing the cigarette tax, you're actually increasing the rest of that element of our tax system.
Yeah, that's a good point. In the back?
So what is the value of the tax breaks that the state gives? Like our biennial budget is $34 billion. Has anybody estimated what the value is of the tax breaks that we give?
It's a great question. For a very long time, tax breaks have been enacted and there is no intent expressed about why, no metrics to measure whether or not they're meeting an intent. And so that is starting to change, and Representative Carlisle has been a huge champion of that in making sure that there are metrics and that there's intent. A lot of this applies to new tax breaks, so we haven't been able to do a whole lot for the 600 or so that are already on the books, but going forward, tax breaks have to have an expressed intent. We have to measure them. They have to have a sunset date, and if they don't, they'll automatically sunset in 10 years. So all of that is intended to create more rigor and more analysis of exactly what you're talking about. What is the benefit to the state of giving these tax breaks? Are they actually delivering on that benefit, and allowing lawmakers to scrutinize that information and make decisions?
Has anybody estimated the amount?
The amount.
Oh, the amount? There's $6.5 billion that we forego in revenue through tax breaks.
What are the side tax breaks that you mentioned that Carlisle is advocating?
This is from the governor's budget, so I don't know.
Okay, from the government.
Yeah, so the exempting, so basically, the trade-in value of your car over $10,000, closing the extracted fuel tax, closing the out-of-state sales tax break, so for Oregonians, the bottled water tax, and preferential B&O rate on royalties. So those are the five. So I think that I just got the signal that we're out of time. I think you guys are moving on to something else, but I'm sorry I didn't get to all your questions, but I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for all the work that you're doing.